The recording button has started. We're not going to actually start for another second or two, but I didn't want to forget that. So, yeah, now we got people telling stories about the Super Bowl. I see that over there in the chat. Nothing seems to be able to happen when we have a live session with the Kevin Eikenberry group where things about sports don't seem to show up. I'm not sure why that is, but it does seem to be the case. Um, and again, I'm going to ask those of you to turn off your cameras if you would. Normally, I wouldn't do that, but that's what we're doing today. And so it is now 3:30. I'm going to change the slide and we're going to get started. So welcome everybody to this webinar, maybe the longest webinar title ever. Everybody, navigating uncertainty, mastering flexible leadership in a changing world. And so let's just start here and say, I'm pretty confident, like I am very confident that all of us would say that the world is uncertain. Like we would say that the world is uncertain now, wouldn't we? And we would say also that, well, there's a lot of change going on in our world right now. We would say that that's true. I'm going to ask all of you to just turn off your cameras if you would, those are joining us. And man, the world is changing. The world is uncertain. And we're going to talk about that big word uncertainty today. We're going to rip off the Band-Aid about that in just a couple seconds. And here's what I know. A lot of you are showing up here. You're telling us where you're located. There are a few of your names that I know. Here's the fact. The fact is that we don't really know who you are in every case. But I know some things about you, even if I don't know exactly who you are. I know that you care about being more successful. I don't know if you're in the line of your organization. I don't know if you're at the C-suite in your organization. I don't know if you're a VP, a director, a senior manager. I don't know if you're a trainer. I don't know if you're an OD. I don't know if you're an individual leader wanting to get better. But wherever you are and whatever your role is, I'm pretty confident that you care about the success of your organization, the effectiveness of your organization, and you know that leaders, including you, are one of the things that it takes to be more successful. And that you're here because you want the organization to be more successful, your team to be more successful, and ultimately for you as a leader or for the other leaders in your organization to be more successful. So as I said, I know who some of you are, but I certainly don't know who all of you are. But that's the starting point that I come to as I work to build a conversation with you in the next hour about navigating uncertainty. So I also know this, that not all of you know who I am. So let me just put the slides back on if I can for a second. And if I can get, if you can turn off that other video, that other thing, if you can for me, uh, Marlene, that would be fantastic. And let me just tell you a little bit about me if you don't know who I am. My name is Kevin Eikenberry. I am your host today. I've written a bunch of books. You see a bunch of them up there. I've written a brand new one that's coming out soon called Flexible Leadership. There's a lot of stuff up there that's true about me. Here's the thing I really, really, really want you to know, if you don't know, and that is that I am like you leading a team every day. And it is from that context, from the context of leading a team, that I come to you. So, yes, I work with leaders all over the world all the time. And so I have a lot of insight from all that. But I also come, hopefully, with a very practical approach to leading that I hope will make this extraordinarily useful for you. And again, if you don't know who I am, I'll just put this slide up and let you read a couple things about me real quick. And so I guess all I'll say about that is that, well, yes, there are some people that have said that I do some pretty good work. And I'm super excited to be sharing some of this with you today. All right. So the question might be, why would we want to talk about this now? Why would we want to talk about this idea of navigating uncertainty now? Well, I think it's safe to say that the world has more uncertainty now than ever, right? Like there's no question that we have a more complex world, we have a more uncertain world than we've ever had before, and that's why I bring this to you. And I bring this to you in part because, as some of you know, I have a brand new book coming out soon called Flexible Leadership. And some of the things I'm going to share with you today are ideas that are in this book. And in fact, some of the things I'm going to share with you today are things that, well, quite honestly, are things I've learned since I wrote the book. And so I'm happy to share and excited to share all of it with you today. Here's what we promised you when you registered, that we would do these things, that we would outline why leaders need to lead differently, that we would talk about why flexibility is the solution to these challenges of uncertainty. And we will give you a model to use to help you understand the context of your situation so that you can flex intelligently, and we'll help you think about how you can do this in your organization. So that's where we're headed. That's what we promised. That's what you signed up for, if you will. And so that's what, excuse me, I want us to talk about. And as I said a few minutes ago, I'm going to start by pulling off the Band-Aid. You know how that works? Like you just need to rip it off, right? And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about this idea of uncertainty. And to do that, I want to ask you a question. And I'll just have you in the chat real quick say, which do you think is worse, uncertainty or fear? I'll let you put that in the chat right now. And I want to share a couple of things with you about that as you are putting your thoughts in there. Okay. And I'm seeing an awful lot of people saying fear. Okay. So let me share some research with you. I want you to imagine a situation. Actually, this is a situation I'm pretty sure you don't want to actually find yourself in. Daniel Ellsberg did a famous study in 1992, and it's about electrical shock. Right. So imagine you're placed in one of two groups. One group, and everyone is informed that they're going to receive 20 electrical shocks. You know that's going to happen. And you know that the shocks you're going to receive are either going to be moderate or strong. Okay. And that's what you know. That's what you signed up for, if you will. Now, you don't know this yet, but here's what happens. One group receives 20 strong shocks. The other group receives 17 strong shocks with 3 moderate shocks randomly interspersed amongst the other 17. Everybody gets 20. One group gets all of them the same and all strong. The other group gets 17 strong and 3 at random that are moderate. And guess which group had more stress? I'll put that in the chat next. Which group do you think had more stress? Curious what you think about that. I'll take a look there. The 17, the 17, the 17, the second group, the mixed shop group. Guess what? You are all correct. So what does that tell us? Well, what that tells us is that if we don't know, if we have uncertainty, we have greater stress than if you could say, well, 3 of them weren't as bad. And yet the uncertainty made our anxiety and our stress go up. So now let's talk about fear versus anxiety, because now we can connect the idea of uncertainty with stress and anxiety, right? So now let's talk about fear versus anxiety. Here's the difference. Imagine, I don't want you to really, I hope this is only in your imagination, that in your situation that you find yourself in a neighborhood and you see a rabid dog. And of course, you're going to be scared of this dog, right? You don't want this dog to bite you or those around you. And so you're fearful of the rabid dog. Now, let's say that you no longer can see the dog. You're still going to be fearful, right? You're not going to know. You're not going to be aware. But let's say that you know that the dog is removed and then the fear is gone. But if all you know is that you can't see the dog, then your anxiety will continue. And so in fact, anxiety doesn't have an end game, but fear does. Like once we know that the thing that we're fearing is removed, then things are better. But think about where we are in the workplace. We don't see an end game for it. And so that means the anxiety remains, which means that anxiety being connected to uncertainty would lead us to say that the research would lead us to say that uncertainty is actually worse than fear. And yet we wouldn't really normally think about it that way, right? So let's think about how we deal with uncertainty. Well, how do we deal with uncertainty? Well, we do one of several things. The first thing we try to do is we try to ignore it. We try to ignore the uncertainty, or we try to plow through it, or we honestly become immobilized by it. So we either try to ignore it, we try to just, put on our big boy pants and push our way through it, or we are immobilized by it. And often, if we're immobilized by it, it's because we're in search of some kind of best answer. There's got to be a best answer. Yeah, I know you don't see my slides because I don't have them on. So here's the thing. We're searching for the best answer. We're searching for the right answer, which means that we're going to wait until we figure out what that one is, and we're immobilized by that. And so now I am going to turn my slides back on for you all, and I want to show you a picture of what I'm talking about. Okay. Here's what I'm talking about for you all. Okay. What I'm talking about is the tension between what is best or what we think is right and what we think could be good. And when we're in uncertain times, often we're trying to think, well, what's the best answer? What's the right answer? We're trying to find the thing that will make it all go away, make it better, help us be more successful, help the team feel better. And the reality is that often what we really need to do is say, what are some possible good answers that we could try? Because we don't really know what's coming. There are unknowable things here. So we'd be better off to try to think about what are some possible good answers rather than focusing on a single best answer. So I'm going to describe this thing that I'm just showing you right now as what's called a flexor. That are we leaning toward what is best or trying to find what is best, or are we looking at good, and where should we land on that? And I would suggest to you, in times of uncertainty, we ought to be trying to lean more towards the right side than the left side. So let's talk some very specific facts about uncertainty, if we can. I'd like to do that with you now. And so I'm going to do one other thing so I make sure I can see the chat again. There we go. So here's the thing. Uncertainty, right? The reality is we can't wish it away. It's here. Uncertainty is real, and we now know it's meaningful, right? So we can't wish it away. We can't just sort of close our eyes and hope. We can't click our heels. There is going to be uncertainty around us, both in the macro picture as well as in the what we're doing today, right now kind of picture. Okay. And here's the next thing. It's hard. We already know that. We've already said that now perhaps we ought to be thinking about uncertainty as being a bigger deal than fear. And so if we know there's a lot of uncertainty in our organizations and on our teams, then we need to be aware of that as leaders, and we know that it's hard. And when things are uncertain, as we've just highlighted for you, decision making is harder, without question, right? And next thing that's true, and we've already talked about this too, is that when uncertainty exists, anxiety goes up, stress goes up, and probably fatigue goes up, which means that for all of the things that when we think about all of the sort of mental health stuff, or what we would say mental fitness stuff that's in our world, that all of this uncertainty is one of the things it's adding to all of those things. So let's just think about that for a second. If decision making is harder, and if we have more anxiety, more stress, more fatigue, not just us, but the team, if we have all of that stuff, right? And does that leave us in a place where, as an organization or as an individual, that we can do our best work? Certainly not. And then not only that, but it stresses our relationships. So the question is, we know that uncertainty is a big deal, and maybe we even think it's a bigger deal now than we thought it was 15 minutes ago. Don't want to make you feel bad about that, but I do want to tell you that we have to take it seriously. But I don't just want to leave you there. I want to say, well, okay, now what? And the now what is this? If we want to address uncertainty, it requires us to be flexible. It requires us to be flexible. And so let's talk about flexibility for a second. Here's what I mean by flexibility. The reality is that when we are able to flex, we can better navigate uncertainty, right? And here's the thing. The world we know is changing. So let's just take you as an individual leader, let's just say 5 years ago, pre-pandemic. And you were leading and you were working hard to lead effectively and you were leading at some level of success. But I would guess you would say, well, I could have been leading better. I mean, I could have been more effective 5 years ago than I was. And I know I could have been. And so if we stay, you stay or I stay in that same spot for the next 5 years, as the world all around us, as the expectations of us as leaders has changed, as the larger world has changed, as the nature of our work has changed, if all of that is changing, but we haven't changed, do you think the odds that things have moved in a direction to make us more effective is true? No. Like the world has not conspired to move towards our status quo as a leader, right? So if we were not as effective as we could have been 5 years ago, and the world continues to change all around us, do you think that we've gotten better by it standing still? I would say not true. But I also know in all of the work that I've done in the last couple of years that when you talk about the word flexible, people will say, well, I ought to be adaptable. Adaptable seems nice. I ought to be flexible. That seems nice, Kevin. But aren't we supposed to be consistent? As a leader, don't we want people to know what we stand for and where we're at and how we lead and all of those things? To which I would say, let's just consider a tree. Now, I can look out the window on the other side of this camera and see a tree. But you can picture a tree in your mind's eye right now. And here's what you know about that tree, that that tree is rooted. And because it's rooted, it will be able to grow. And it's stable and it's solid and it's consistent, right? But if there's any sort of breeze as you look at that tree, you also know that that tree is not rigid, but it's flexible, it's pliable. The branches can move in the wind, and it's because of that that it is able to continue to be successful. And it's the idea of the tree that I want you to think about. That as leaders, we need to be steadfast, rooted in our principles, in our values, in our why, in our mission. And those are the things that keep us steady, stable, and strong. And yet we must be flexible in how we lead. So here's the fact. The fact is that you probably, when you would think about the ideas of, when you would think about the ideas of flexible and consistent or stable, you might consider them to be either or. Like I'm either consistent or I'm flexible. I'm suggesting to you that that's not the way to look at it. That the better way to look at it to look at it as both and. That we can be both consistent and flexible, just like a tree. And so I would suggest then further that the reality is that as a leader, that we ought to be thinking about being a both and leader. Here's what I mean by that. A both and leader is someone that can meet this test. The test that we can hold two opposing ideas in our mind at the same time and apply each when needed. Best, good, right? Consistent, flexible. And so this idea of being a both and leader is the underlying idea behind being a flexible leader, or both and leadership is flexible leadership, right? So as I said to you earlier, and I'm going to challenge you again with it by putting it on the screen, in a changing world, what are the odds, the odds of your success being that you are of being successful if you're not intelligently changing? It's not very likely. I wouldn't take those odds. And I don't think you would either. So we've set the table. We've talked about the fact that uncertainty is all around us. It's not going to go away. It's hard. It's meaningful. It's something we have to deal with. And I'm proposing to you that being flexible is the way that we can navigate it more successfully. So now I want to do a little mind experiment with you, if I may. And for this mind experiment, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like you to imagine that I'm going to place you out in the wilderness and ask you to find your way out. And what's the first thing? I'll just have you do this in the chat. What's the first thing you would want? What's the first thing that you would want if I put you out in a remote area and I said I want you to find your way out? What's the first thing you would want? Someone says a pocket knife, a compass, a map, a map, a map, a map. I mean, it's kind of like if I put you out there. Tiffany wants a car. Okay, so like here's the thing. I probably want water. I want those other things, a phone that works. Awesome. And what are you going to use that phone for? Either to call someone or to pull up the map. And here's the thing, if you had the map, let's assume I didn't put you so far out that you couldn't find your way out if you had a map that Lisa wants her mom. Well, that's fair. Okay, Amy, I'll leave that one to you. Okay. The single most common answer there was a map. Whoops, was a map. Like we'd want to have a map. We'd like to have a way to say, well, okay, this is where I'm at. How do I go from here? Like even if you're even if you're in the mall and you see this big thing, you're in the airport, you see this big thing, it says, you are here. So we'd want to know that, right? Yeah, but Lisa says, I want GPS. And so let me talk about that idea of GPS for a second. Because people on my team would tell you that I have a love-hate relationship with Google Maps, as an example. And there's times when I certainly love it. And there's certainly things we can learn from having something like Google Maps. But here's what this thing doesn't do for us. It doesn't give us a very big picture. It says, here you are, do this thing next. In the next 400 feet, turn left. That's what it tells you. And in some situations, that's extraordinarily helpful. But in other times, what we really need is to see the picture differently. See the picture at what I would call a bird's eye view, which is what a map gives us, the chance to see something at a bird's eye view. And what I want to share with you now is a way to help us understand what the map is for when we're leading and what's going on. And I'm going to describe this to you with something that you may have never heard of, but it's super valuable. It's called the Kevin framework. So you might not know how to say that word. It's Kevin. It rhymes with Kevin, as it turns out. And here's what this framework says, that situations are going to fall, generally speaking, into one of these four contexts. This is our map, or can be, or could be, and I would argue will be highly helpful to us if it is our map. So I'm going to go through this very quickly just to give you an idea of what it says. And we're going to start at the bottom right with the clear context. This is the context we all want to be leading in. In fact, this is the context that we act as if we're in most of the time. This is where we know stuff and there are familiar patterns. Then we can sense what's going on and we can make a response. We can make a decision. Most people can agree on what the cause and effect would be. If we do this, this is what's going to happen, that the dominoes will fall in this sort of way. We have facts, like there are agreed upon solutions. This is the land of best practices, and many of us live in that land, and we want to be in that land. But guess what? That is a land of certainty. And so I would suggest to you that most of the time we operate as if we're in that clear context. And yet I would argue and say that most of our work and most of the time we're actually in the two that are above that, complicated and complex. So a complex context is when there are things that we know and things that we know we don't know. And so in a complicated context, we want to get expert input. Maybe we can forecast, maybe we can guess. We don't know for sure. If we can get expert input, that's going to really help us. We probably have to make some assessment and make some guesses. We have some information so we can guess and we can try and maybe we can improve our odds. Doesn't that start to sound a little bit more like most of our work? Best practices don't help us here very much, really. Because if we apply best practices when the situation is complicated or complex, then we're trying to implement something that's not really based on the world in which we're in or the situation in which we're in, that leads us to the complex context, which is when there are things that we don't know and we don't even know that we don't know them. There are blind spots that we're unaware of. There are competing ideas and options. And we can look at those options and we can all say, well, there's merit there and there's merit here, and it's unpredictable. And maybe if we try this, it'll work, and maybe it won't. And we're not sure. And we're not even sure what all the criteria ought to be. There is paradox. Is it conscious? Excuse me. Is it this or is it that? Which is more important? Which is more valuable? And here, what we need are lots of ideas and having the willingness to try stuff, not even really knowing what will work. But we all know we ought to try something. And maybe we try small, we pilot things to see how they're going to go, and that gives us our best chance of success. And yet, too often, we don't live, even if that's the map, that where we are on the map, we try to make things like they're clear. That leads us to the fourth of the context, which is the chaotic context. Now, a lot of us will say, man, my world is chaotic. I'm living in chaos all the time. And I would propose to you that when we're saying that, it's more often that it's actually complex and not chaotic, right? Uh, the chaotic time is a time of tremendous turbulence, tremendous tension. We can't find any patterns that seem to exist. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you live in an area where there are hurricanes. During a hurricane, it's chaotic. We don't know when it's going to hit, where it's going to hit, what it's going to look like, how it's going to be, and yet we have to we have to do something, even though we don't know yet. This is the mode in which my dad would have used to say, like, try something even if it's wrong. Like in this case, this is when your team is looking to you and saying, we need to do something. What should we do? And you may not know, but we need to act in some way. We have to be ready to be agile and adjust and shift and change when we get things that are known. But right now, in the chaotic moment, we need some sense of decision and direction. And that's where we need to go. Now, look at the bottom two. Even though the difference between clear and chaotic is vast, those are the two contexts in which us taking the lead with decisions, maybe even unilaterally, might make sense. And yet, most of the time, the world in which we work and live in is complicated or complex, in which case that's probably the wrong answer. So we could spend a lot more time here than we have time to do today, but I wanted to give you an idea of this map. If we want to deal with and lead through and navigate uncertainty, we need a map. And we need to recognize that the map, the part of the map that we're likely living in most of the time, and not just on the big stuff, but on the smaller stuff around our teams, are more often on the top half of this framework, the Cynefin framework. So the point that I want to make for you now is one that has become increasingly profoundly true to me over the last couple of years, and that is that when we have context, we are a lot smarter. When we know what our context is, if you can just start to understand this idea and say, man, I need to adjust how I do things based on the context in which I'm living and working and leading. And so this is a way to help us think about context. And once we understand our context, we can become a lot smarter. So I have now introduced to you two of the three parts of what we call the flexible leadership approach. And I introduced the first one without even really using that word. But fundamentally, what I said to you was this: listen, if we want to be more flexible, if we want to navigate uncertainty, we have to be intentional. We can't just go on autopilot, but we have to be intentional. And then we have to think about the context of the situation, what we've just been talking about. And the third part of the flexible leadership approach I've also mentioned, but you didn't know it yet, and that is what we call a flexor. So flexible leadership equals intention plus context plus flexors. So let me give you another example of a flexor that I think is very relevant for all of us as leaders that we can think about, right? So here we go. This is an example flexor. I call this the compliance commitment flexor. So here's what it looks like. On one end, so I'll just ask this question and we'll get you back in the chat right now. Would you prefer, or do you want to lead for compliance or commitment? Pick. Tell me which of those you want to lead for. We'll just let those slide in there for a second. Commitment all day long. John says both. Commitment, commitment, commitment. Everyone is saying commitment. Some people are saying commitment all day long, twice on Sunday. A couple people are saying both. All right. I haven't noticed anyone in the chat saying compliance. I mean, we got some boths. I got nobody saying compliance. So let's talk about this a little bit more. And by the way, I've asked lots and lots of people this question in groups, and usually the results come out almost exactly like where you are. Chris says, depends on where you are in a regulated industry. Now Brian's taking his answer back. Okay. It depends. Fraser says it depends on the circumstance or objective / the context. Like it really does depend. Right? So let's talk about what the ends of this flexor look like. Pure compliance simply is I've got people complying, which simply means what? Yes, boss. Whatever you say, boss. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's the far end of that side, right? Pure, mere compliance is whatever you say, boss. Okay. Now let's go to the other end of the spectrum, shall we? The pure commitment end is the end that says, I'm all in. I value this. I'm committed. I'm engaged. I'm accountable. I have ownership. All of that is what I want from my team. And that's why so many of you said, well, that's what I want all day long. And I would say that I'm with those of you that said commitment and that I want to lean in that direction. But here's the idea of a flexor. The idea of the flexor is to ask the question, which do you want, frames it as you either have this or this. And I said to be a flexible leader means to think both and. Like both can be true. Let me give you a couple of examples. Both can be true, right? And I'll even give you some examples that help you lead you to say, well, it depends on the context of the situation. If everybody knows the information, if the context is clear, if there's clear cause and effect, if people know that you have tremendous experience in this area and they trust you, can you lean into compliance more heavily? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Right? And in fact, can you think of times when people are complying, they could also be committed to that at the same time? So Kristen's saying to achieve compliance, commitment has to come first. I'm not sure I agree with that in every case, because in some cases people say, well, I still want a paycheck, so I might as well do whatever they say. I don't love it. I don't like it. I'll do it. But if you get just that, to your point, Kristen, if there is a level of commitment first, then you get more than just blind following, and you get more than doing exactly. It depends on what the commitment is made. Exactly right. Okay. The point here is this, that while almost every leader I've asked this question, a number of you said both, and I framed it up such that a lot of you were saying, oh yeah, there's probably both here. When I ask people, they say, well, I want people to be committed. And yet when you look in the workplace, what do we find? Far more people are closer to complying than being committed. Right? So even if what we want is commitment, we're not necessarily, in every case, every leader, getting it, even if that's what we want. What I'm suggesting to you that if the situation is chaotic, for example, all people want is for you to do something so we can just move. Like, give us something to hold on to, Kevin. Give me something to do. I'll follow it. Maybe not forever, but for today and tomorrow, I will. And so give me something I can comply with so we can move forward. And so this is an example of a flexor. All of you have a place that you, well, so here's the first thing. I would suggest to you that the far ends of this are rarely the perfect answer. That the right or best answer is somewhere in between these, holding the tension between them, somewhere in between them, given the context of the situation. And so here's the confounding factor. As leaders, most of you on this call like are wanting to be more effective. Most of you on this webinar have studied and worked and taken workshops from us or others about leadership, and you want to be a more effective leader. And you probably have taken assessments and tools and have a leadership style. And all of that is wonderful until it's not. Because here's the thing, if you say, hey, I'm a leader that wants to lead for compliance, and that's my leadership style, that's my leadership approach, then what that means is if that becomes your identity, then you're not willing to flex because you said, this is who I am. This is the way I lead. Whether that's as a facilitative leader, a servant leader, we could go right on down and make a whole long list of things that we might identify ourselves as. And the value of styles is to understand our nature. The problem with styles is using them to become an excuse because they become our identity. That's who we are. So in order for us to understand the ability to flex, we have to say that number one, it's possible to flex. And number two, it's in many cases preferable to flex based on what? The context. So what I've just described to you is the idea that I have to say, yeah, flexing might be helpful. And yeah, my natural tendency might not best serve me. And maybe I should look at the context of this situation before I decide what to do. And that stop might be just a stop to take a breath to decide what I'm going to do next. That stop might be, I need to think about this for a little bit before I send that email. That stop might be, let me sleep on this till tomorrow. I'm not suggesting intention means we're overriding our natural response, our habit, our style, what we've decided, what we've done so often that it becomes our natural reaction. Being a flexible leader means we have to say, I got to at least consider that my natural response might not be the best approach right now. What I'm suggesting to you is not easy because it's asking us to think about our habit and deciding if our habitual natural auto response is going to work well here or not. Okay. So I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to put the flexor back up here, but I'm going to stop. I know there's been some stuff in the comments. Any questions so far? I want to do that before I get too much further down my slides. Any questions or comments for me? We have plenty of time. Anything about what I've said? Because I've unpacked some things that might lead you to want to ask me a question. Any comments? Questions? Anybody? Karen says practicing the pause will be really important to do this and explore other styles. That's right, because without the pause, it's just natural response, right? Without the pause, it's, well, I have a lot of D traits because I know DISC, or I am an ENFP, or I am a decisive leader, or whatever it might happen to be, right? And so rather than saying, well, that's who I am, people are going to have to get used to me as a leader because this is my approach to leading. I'm suggesting there's a lot of things we want to be consistent on, but it isn't necessarily our approach, right? That's the underlying point here. Anybody else have comments or questions? Anybody? So I'm going to slide back up. Lisa says she likes the reminder. That's awesome. Thank you. I'm going to go back. I think I missed a question. Um, Makes a lot of sense. And we've been told over and over that we can't have our cake and eat it too. Well, that's true because, here's the thing that's so true about the either or approach. The world is black and white. Is that easier and uh, it's easier to put our arms around. It's easier to operate in. Uh, we were in school and there was a right answer and we have to find the right answer. And so there's all sorts of things that lead us to the either or approach to thinking about the world. And yet far more of the world is shades of gray, right? And so if we want to operate and lead in the real world, which has complexity and which has complications and which has uncertainty, then we have to be willing to say, well, among these competing options, what might we consider? Or which direction should I lean here or there based on the need or situation, right? Let's just take another really simple flexor. Let's just call it the asking, speaking flexor. Some of us are more likely to be askers, and some of us are more likely naturally to be speakers, right? And it's pretty obvious to see that there are times when we'd be better off to flex from our whichever one of those is our natural tendency, right? To move based on what the need is in the situation with the individual team member, with the meeting that we're leading, with the project that we're a part of, whatever that might be. That being willing to, being aware of the need to, and then being willing to shift or flex along that continuum is what will help us be more successful. Okay. So here's what we now know, everybody. If I can get my slides to move. Here's what we know. The world is complex and uncertain. We spent the first 15 minutes talking about that, right? And guess what else? So is leading, right? And I'll go back to say what I said to you earlier, and that is that addressing uncertainty requires flexibility. Addressing uncertainty requires flexibility. So now the question is, before I go there, before I start heading down that path, I want to see what Dave said here. Even in a black and white world, two things can be true at once. So we must be flexible to acknowledge that it isn't right or wrong, but rather better and good. Exactly right. It's exactly right. We have choices that we need to make. We need to bring our intuition as well as our experience. We need to bring our learned experiences and our wisdom to the table. And we can only really do that when we get a perspective that helps us see where are we at? What does the map tell us about where we need to go next? So if we want to move in this direction of being a more flexible leader, the question becomes, how do we get there? Which, if you've been with me before, I'm always going to say, so now what are we going to need to actually do? So I promised that we'd talk about this both organizationally and individually. So let's just do that right now. Let me just turn off the slides for a minute and say to you that, as an individual, you can go after this. You can go after this by working on your mindset. And we've done two things so far in this conversation. We've talked about the mindset that we must need in order to be more flexible. We can't just work on the skills of being flexible. We have to have a mindset that matches that. So individually, I need to have a mindset that matches the skill set. And we've started to give you the idea of what that skill set looks like by thinking about these flexors: intention plus context plus flexors. And then it's not just that. I don't just want to give you a toolkit that if we don't use a toolkit, what happens? It gets dusty or rusty. So then it means we have to go from mindset to skill set to habit set. So how do you do that? Well, we have to decide that we want to be more effective leaders and realize that one of the ways to do that is to know that we have to flex. And then we can apply the model that you've been given. And then we can work on doing things, even if they're not our natural response or are intuitive to us, but rather thinking consciously about where we are on the map and what do we do next. And that's what we can do individually. But what about organizationally? What if we want to help a bunch of leaders get better? Well, the first thing is we need to help the organization start to get the idea that we've talked about today. The leaders in the organization need to see that if we want to navigate uncertainty more effectively, we have to focus on being more flexible. We have to help people see this idea of of both and not either or. And then, of course, we need to give them some skills. So mindset, again, mindset, skill set, habit set. We have to give people the skills that allow them and that enable them to be more flexible leaders. And then, of course, we've got to help them build those new habits, which includes things like helping people get the coaching that they need, or accountability for trying to make those new changes, or acknowledgement for when they're trying the things that aren't natural to them, and showing them when they have some success in those things. But I would say organizationally, we want to start by helping people. We want to sort of poke at the idea of how much of a challenge uncertainty is. Not because we're trying to make people nervous, but we're trying to help people see the world as it actually is. Because too often what we see is uncertainty, but what we say is, it's clear, let's just go. Let's just make a decision. Or on the opposite end, we become immobilized by the uncertainty and do nothing. And neither of those are probably the right answer most of the time either, especially when I would propose to you that most of the time our situations, our contexts are more complicated and complex than they are clear or chaotic. So that's a little bit to help you think about this, both for yourself and for the organization. And let me just say this, that before we wrap up, does anyone have a question or a challenge or anything else that you want to ask me before we start to wrap up? Any other things that come to your mind? Anything at all, anybody? Got a minute or two to do that. I see some new messages. Let me scroll down to see them. Okay. Anything else? Anybody has? So specifically then, and again, if you're still typing, keep typing. I see the chat. I'll get there with you in a second. How do we get started? Well, I would propose to you that the way to get started, this probably isn't going to surprise you, is this new book, Flexible Leadership. What I've given you is a taste of flexible leadership. What I've given you is the high-level overview and the structure of flexible leadership. I've given you the approach, intention plus context plus flexors, but there's a lot more obviously to help you, especially in the context and flexor component. And there's a whole lot more to help you move from just the skill set to the habit set. So let me get very specific about what you can do now. And if you don't know, the book comes out on March the 25th, right? And someone says they've already ordered their copy. I love that. So here's the thing. If you're thinking about this for yourself, I'm suggesting to you that you go buy 2 books. Why 2? Well, you should buy 2 books because you need one and you want one for a colleague, in part because, first of all, to help that colleague. But the other thing is to have a colleague that is learning this with you so you can support each other as you work to build new skills and habits. So I'm suggesting you go buy 2 books. And if you go buy a book, some of you have already done that. That's fantastic. Okay. And so those of you that have bought 1, I'm going to bet in a second you're going to want to go buy 2 more. I'll tell you why. Because when you buy 2 books, you're going to get premier access to our virtual LeaderCon event that we're doing on the launch day. So on March the 25th, the day the book comes out, we're doing a 1-day virtual LeaderCon. In the chat, if you've ever been to a virtual LeaderCon event, just say yes in the chat. I just love to see if anyone has. I know that some have, but people are saying yes. So here's the thing. Normally, what happens in VLC is you can buy the recordings and the transcripts and all the bonus materials. There's no way to buy that this time unless you get 2 books. Buy 2 books, and you'll get access to, for both of you, to all of the premier content, all of the recordings, transcripts, etc. of Virtual LeaderCon. So basically, that's worth more than the 2 books. So if you want the Virtual LeaderCon, you can buy the books and you get it cheaper. Like, this is a win all the way around. Okay, there's the first thing. So how do you do that? Well, the simplest way to do that, and Marlene's going to put this in the chat, let's go to kevineikenberry.com/buy2. It'll point you to where you can do that. Obviously, you can also go to Amazon and buy your 2 copies. But if you do it at this link, it'll tell you how you can make sure you get your Virtual LeaderCon registrations. Okay. And Adam, if you've already bought 1 book, go buy another book and then send us an email. So for all of you who said, I've already bought a book, just go buy 1 more, send us an email, and we'll make sure we take care of you and making sure this happens for VLC. Okay. So what if you're saying, well, Kevin, I'm talking about a bunch of leaders, or I've got a whole team of leaders. What about if I want to buy books for my team? Well, here we go. If you buy between 3 and 10 books, it's going to cost you $260. $260 is going to get you 10 books. And if you can't find a way to use all 10 of those books, we're partnering with FFA. You may know the FFA organization, to give extra books to their ambassadors, their teachers of agricultural students around the country. And so for $260, here's what you're going to get. You're going to get VLC for all 10 people. So every one of, you're going to get 10 of those, even if you don't need 10 books. And you're also going to get, if you got 10 people, you probably want to have a book club. You want to have a way to talk about the book. I've just finished writing the discussion guide for the book. That'll be ready. And if you buy up to 10 books, you're going to get that discussion guide available to you. Now, how do you do that? Well, guess what? kevineikenberry.com/buy10, or use that QR code. The QR code will be up again in a second, but I'll give you a second while it's here. So if you just want a couple of books to start, or maybe here's the thing. You're in the organization, like, I want us to use this more in our organization, but I'm not really the big decision maker. Buy a few, hand them out, give them the chance to listen to this recording if you want to do that, and use that as a way to spread the word. But what if you're saying, Kevin, I'm here thinking about this from an OD perspective, leadership training and development perspective. What do I need to think about there? Well, you can certainly buy books for your organization. And there's 3 ways in which you can do that. And you can do that by buying at these levels. And if you buy at these levels, you get a bunch more stuff. So if you buy at the 100 level, in the middle of April, we're going to start a 30-day thing that we're going to call the Flexible Leadership Challenge. Now, we've done challenges before, and the way this challenge works is that people are going to get content every day for 30 days to help them work on building the skill and habit. They're going to get 4 mini webinars from me. They're going to get a live Q&A call with me. And so if you buy 100 books, every one of your 100 people are going to get access to that tool, which we're going to sell, if people don't buy books, for $59 a head. So if you buy 500 books, you're going to get all that stuff. So at 100, you're going to get VLC for everybody. You're going to get the discussion guide that you can use across your organization. You're going to get the Flexible Leadership Challenge for everybody. If you buy 500 books, you're going to get all that stuff, and I'll do a webinar for your organization on flexible leadership or anything else you want for free. And if you want to buy a whole lot of books, we'll trade a webinar for a keynote address anytime you want, to come to your organization, to come to your annual event, to come to whatever. And all it will cost you, besides the cost of the books, is my travel. So in every one of these cases, you're getting far more value than just the cost of the books. And if you need a few less books than these numbers, like I said, we've got a way to get those to people that will make a difference in the world through FFA, and you'll be able to write it all off, if you will. So how do you get to this? The information about all of these, the information for all of these, you will find at kevineikenberry.com/flexible. Or you know you want to do something, or you have questions about any of that, you can call us at 317-387-1424, extension 15. That'll take you right to Phil, and he can answer any of your questions, help you get your order processed. And the way this is going to work, You get these orders in by about the 10th of March, then these books will be fulfilled right around launch day, and you'll get your books soon thereafter. Now, obviously, if you buy 2 copies, you buy them from Amazon, those are probably going to be shipped on launch day. All the rest of these will be delivered to you to the address that you give us soon after we shipped on or shortly after launch day, maybe a few days. So where does this leave us? This leaves us where we started. That uncertainty is real, it's meaningful, it's hard, it's important. We have to recognize it. It may be a bigger deal even than we realize, and to address it requires flexibility. Now, I just thought I'd share really quickly with you 2 of the folks that have had the chance to read the book. One of these people's here, actually. I saw him a few minutes ago in here, Scott Allison. But these are what 2 of the folks who had the chance to read the book ahead said about it. And they, along with others, have said they believe this is going to make a real difference for leaders. Let me just say this as you have a chance to read these. If you've been around our orbit for a while, you know that I've written a number of books, co-written a number of books. I believe this is my most important work to date. I believe this is my best work to date. I had one of the other people who read the book tell me that, although it didn't make the cover of the book. He said, "This is your best work up until now, Kevin." And we would love to help you help your leaders be more effective. And we believe that this is a great way to help do that. And we think that these offers are a great way to do that at a pretty good deal. Look at that. Scott's right there. I didn't request that. I didn't even know he was going to be there, even though I saw him a couple of days ago. So there's the way that you can get them, whether you want to buy 2, you want to buy 10, you want to buy more. There's a way to do all that. If you got questions about any of that, know that you'll get an email from us, and that we'll be following up with you as well. But if you're ready to make those moves, please do that now. Here's what's going to happen when you do that. You're going to get books. You're going to get other valuable tools worth more than the price of the book. And all of those other valuable tools are the things that will help you take this from new awareness, mindset, and even new skill set, and help you turn it into really doing something different, habit set. And so we're trying to practice what we preach in the book, and what we practice and we try to preach all of the time is to really help support you in making this happen. And here's the thing. If you will do this now, you have the best chance of getting your books first. And you will also help us turn this book into a national bestseller, which is our plan and our goal. And you can help us to do that. And I was just going to say one more thing. Because the books won't be shipped from us, but from other places to you, we'll also have it set up. am having book plates created so that once you get your books, and we'll have ways for you to let us know who those people are, I'll sign them. I'll sign the book plates and send them to you. So at the end of the day, all of your people that have gotten books will have them signed with a book plate that they can put right in the front of the book. Hope you'll do that. And I hope that you enjoyed our time together today. I hope you found it insightful. And I hope that you are thinking now about how you can use these ideas for yourself and with the leaders in your organization. And most of all, I hope you'll take a shot at one of these links and join us as we start to help create a world of more flexible leaders. Thanks, everybody.